We've got tips and recipes for healthy living. So for fun and inspiration, come and join us in the raw food world.
My name is Angela Stokes-Monnick, and I have been eating this way. I've been eating raw lifestyle for just over 9 years. Last month was my 9-year raw anniversary, and my life is basically unrecognizable these days from how it used to be. As he mentioned earlier, I used to weigh nearly 300 pounds, and I was basically miserable. I was always ill. I was on countless different medications. There were points where I was literally taking 14 or 15 different pills a day into my body, and it was all allopathic medicine because I knew nothing different at that point. I knew nothing about natural health. How did I get to be that size? Well, it began for me with a thyroid issue when I was 11. My thyroid went underactive, it went hypo, and I started to gain weight from that, but that was really just the beginning. You know, that was like the start of the spiral, and pretty much what happened after that was I started to get bigger, so I didn't want to be as active, whereas prior to that I was the fastest runner in my school, I was swimming, dancing, you name it. Suddenly I was getting this body that was bigger and bigger, and I didn't want to be as active anymore. And food became this huge focus for me. It became like my crutch, really, in life. My best friend, my ally, just like an alcoholic or a cigarette smoker or whatever, I got into this crazy compulsive relationship with food. Food was the strongest relationship in my life. Humans, to me, were just like an absolute annoyance, Pretty much, if I was awake, I was eating, or I was thinking about eating, and people just got in my way. So, it started from the thyroid condition, but that was really just the beginning. Once I started to medicate this, I still continued to gain weight for an entire decade. From the age of 11 until 21, I was gaining weight that entire time, non-stop. So by the age of 21, I was almost 300 pounds, chronically ill, very shut down emotionally. I would not speak to anybody about my weight, my health, anything beyond the superficial. Completely superficial relationships with other people. Taking lots of medication, and I'd been single for at least like 5 years or something by that point. So I was alone and lonely. I didn't want to be on my own. Really not a very vibrant way to be living through my teens and my early 20s. Right? I went to university, everyone tells me, oh, it's like the greatest years of your life. And for me, I was in a body like this big, always ill, miserable. It was not the greatest time of my life, for sure. What began the change for me was when I became that size, I overheard somebody saying that she thought I had diabetes. And it was like the switch that flicked everything for me. She didn't even know that I heard her. I just heard her saying, I think she's got diabetes. She just seems to be really ill. So I looked up diabetes and discovered that I literally had every single symptom of diabetes. And I was terrified. I was like 21 years old, and I thought, okay, I have completely destroyed myself. I was basically eating myself into the grave. I did a diabetes test in secret because I would never speak to anyone about my health. And it turned out that actually, officially, I didn't have diabetes. And, whatever that means, whether I was pre-diabetic or whatever was going on, I felt like I was being given a second chance. And I knew I needed to do something different because obviously if we keep doing the same things, we keep getting the same results. And what I had been doing was basically eating non-stop for at least a decade and thousands and thousands of calories a day, and pretty much all junk food. I thought salads were just completely ridiculous. Like, why would you eat something like that? And if a meal didn't have meat in it, to me it was pointless. It's like, there's nothing there. What am I going to eat? pushed myself right to that edge, and then I knew I had to do something different, but I didn't know what. So I kind of guessed, because I didn't want to speak to anyone, so I kind of didn't snack as much, and I tried to be a bit more active, and I lost a bit of weight. I lost maybe like 30 pounds, something like that. But when you're like 300 pounds and you lose 30, it doesn't actually make that much difference. So it wasn't for me until 9 years ago, when somebody lent me a book about raw food, that everything really changed. I was living in Iceland at the time, and a friend of mine, she could see how miserable I was, and she was a homeopath. And she said, "Would you like to borrow a book?" And she lent me this book about raw food. And that was just, for me, that light bulb moment. You know, I started to read this book, I couldn't stop reading it. I read the whole book in one night. It was called Raw Family by the Botenkos, if you're curious about it. It's just a little testimonial book of one family's story of how they chose a raw food lifestyle and their lives completely transformed. I read this book, I just felt like this is what I've been waiting for. You know, I was not one of those people who had tried every diet out there. You know, you often hear that from people. That was not me. I had just eaten non-stop for a decade, hit a wall, didn't know what to do next, and I got this book and I just felt like this is what I want to do. This is what makes sense. This feels natural. Of course, I had some arguments in my head, like, well, what about the bread, and of different things coming up, but I was really in quite an ideal situation. I was single, I didn't own any kitchen equipment that was suddenly going to become defunct. I was living in Iceland working in organic greenhouses, so access to all this organic vegetable matter, and it really just all fell into place for me, and the very next day I started to eat this way. I actually was 100% raw for 1 week in the beginning. I started to eat this way, and the results were immediate, of course, because I was coming from such a toxic background into eating suddenly celery sticks and walnuts and raisins or something. So my body went through a massive detox process right off the bat. And for me, it felt very, very extreme to be that raw, that quickly. So I did it for 1 week, and then I took a step back to eating about 70-80% raw for the first couple of years of my journey. And in that time, I released about 160 pounds of excess weight. In the first year alone, 105 pounds came off, which is like a whole person, right? We probably know people who weigh about that much. That whole thing came off in 1 year. It was a really dramatic time of transformation for me. Aside from the physical, emotionally, socially, spiritually, romantically, you name it, Lee, my life was just like just shifting in every possible way.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again at the Raw Food World.